Chapter 3. John Jones. "I want you," whispered Nick. How many luckless criminals have been startled by these words? How many have been seeing the prison or the gallows rise before them at the sound? In this case, however, the words seemed to produce less than the ordinary effect. The man to whom they were addressed turned suddenly towards the detective, but did not shrink or tremble. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I didn't quite understand what you said." The man's coolness made Nick even more in doubt about Gaspard's identification. After boarding the train, they had walked through it hurriedly, and in the car next the engine, Gaspard had clutched Nick's arm, whispering, "There is your man." The person indicated was well dressed, rather good looking, and about 35 years old. There was nothing particularly striking about his appearance. It would have been easy to have found dozens of such men on Lower Broadway any day. Nick feared a mistake, but Gaspard was sure. "I never forget a face," he said. "That is the man whom I saw coming out of the room B. That is the murderer." The man was standing up and holding on to one of the straps. His profile was turned to them. Nick waited until he turned and showed his full face. The detective was bound to give Gaspard every chance to change his mind. But he remained firm, and at last Nick approached the accused and suddenly whispered the terrifying words in his ears. Having done so, he was obliged to carry it through. Therefore, when the stranger asked Nick to repeat what he had said, the detective, in a low voice, inaudible to anybody else in the car, told him what the accusation was. "This is ridiculous," said the man. "I read the story of this affair in the papers this morning, but I am not connected with it in any way. If you arrest me, you must be prepared to take the consequences." "I guess we can manage the affair quietly," said Nick, "and give you no trouble at all. I suppose you are going downtown to business?" "Yes." "Well, I will go along too, if you don't mind." "By all means," said the man, and he looked much relieved. "I understand what your duty is," he continued. "Since this imported French jackass has made this charge, of course you'll have to look into it. Come down to the office and make some inquiries, and then go up to my flat. I was at home last evening after 8 o'clock. "What did you do before that?" "I had dinner with my wife, and then put her aboard a train. She's gone away on a visit." "Where is she gone?" "No, sir, none of that. I don't propose to have a detective go flying after her to scare her to death. She keeps out of this mess, if I have any say about it." "But if you're arrested, she'll hear about it and come back to the city." "I'm not going to be arrested. You're too sensible a man to do such a thing. I can see that." "Here we are. We get off at Franklin Street. My place of business is just a little way up the street towards Broadway." They left the train. Nick was beginning to feel that a mistake had been made. This man's easy manner and perfect confidence were hard to square with the idea of his guilt. "By the way," said the suspect as they descended the stairs, "I forgot to give you my card." He handed it to Nick as he spoke, and the detective read this: "Mr. John Jones, Allen, Morse and Jones, electrical fixtures, the sunlight lamp." "What did I tell you?" exclaimed Gaspard, who was looking over Nick's shoulder. "It is the name that was on the register. He is the man." But Nick took a different view. He was of the opinion that Mr. Jones had presented very strong evidence of his complete innocence. Anybody else might have signed himself John Jones, but the real John Jones never. It would be mighty hard to convince a jury that a man meditating murder had recorded his correct name for the benefit of the police. The coincidence was certainly astonishing, but it was in Jones's favor. They walked over to the office of Allen, Morse and Jones. Mr. Allen was there. "Good morning, Mr. Allen," said Jones. "My name has got me into trouble again." "How is that?" "Did you read about that French restaurant murder last night?" "Well, I glanced at the story in one of the papers." "This Frenchman here is the waiter in the place. He saw me in an elevated train just now and told this other man, who is a detective, that I was the party who took that woman to the restaurant. That was bad enough, but when they found out what my name was, they convicted me immediately. It appears that the visitor to the restaurant signed the very uncommon name of John Jones on the books. Why, what the devil? Exclaimed Allan, looking wrathfully at poor Gaspard, who was shaking in his shoes. Don't you know that this is a serious matter? What do you mean? He is the man, cried Gaspard. If I were dying, I would swear with my last breath that he is the man. But who is the woman? Asked Allan, turning to Nick. And what is she to do with my partner? That I cannot say, replied Nick. She is not being identified. Then you have absolutely nothing to go upon except this fellow's word? Nothing. Why, this is nonsense. Perhaps so, said Nick, but you will admit that I would be false to my duty if I did not make an investigation. Investigate all you wish, laughed Jones, but don't bother me any more with than you have to. This is my busy day. I'm going right away, said Nick. All I want of you is that you will give me your address and meet me at your home in the latter part of the afternoon. Very well, said Jones, and he scribbled on a piece of paper. I'll be there at 4:30. Nick thanked Mr. Jones for his courtesy and immediately withdrew, but he did not go far. In a convenient doorway he wrote a note to Chick on the back of a scrap of paper which Joan had given him and sealed it in an envelope. Then he sent Gaspard with it to Chick, who was on the lookout in the undertaker's room where the body lay. Having dispatched this message, Nick changed his disguise and kept watch over the establishment of Allan, Morse, and Jones. Nothing of importance happened until a little afternoon, when a reply came from Chick. Translated from the detective cipher, it read as follows. The address is that of a good flat house. Jones lives there with his wife. They have been there about only 2 months. Nobody in the house knows anything about them. They had one servant who was taken sick about 2 weeks ago and carried to a hospital where she died. Since then they have lived absolutely alone. There is nobody in the house who has seen Mrs. Jones's face. She always wore a heavy veil. The only description I could get tallied with that of the body. The principal point was the hair. I have just found a woman who saw Mr. and Mrs. Jones go out yesterday afternoon. She remembers Mrs. Jones's dress. The description agrees with that found on the corpse. Jones carried an alligator skin traveling bag. Nobody saw either of them come back to the house, but Jones evidently slept there. I shall take the woman who saw them go out of the room where the body lies. We'll send Patsy down with the results of this effort at identification. I believe it will show that the woman to be Mrs. Jones. I send this to you that you may have warning. Chick. Nick read this note and then glanced across the street towards the office of Allan, Morse, and Jones. Through the window he could see Jones calmly writing a letter. Could it be possible that this man was guilty of so hideous a crime? Half an hour passed, and then came the second message as follows. Identified as Mrs. Jones. End of Chapter 3.